Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hello and welcome back to During ASEAN. You're with Gowri.
And this is Grace.
And this is Arlene.
And we are back for our ABC dialogue for this Monday morning.
And then today we're going to talk about the post-budget 2015.
We have a lot of budget discussion in the past, but this is interesting and I think extra special because we have a guest from Persatuan Ekonomi Malaysia, or in English it will be Economic Association of Malaysia. And we have
Tan Sri Dato Mohd Sharif Muhammad Kassim, who is actually the president of the Malaysian Economic Association. So let's say good morning to him.
Good morning.
Thank you very much.
Good morning.
I'm pleased to be here.
Thank you for joining us in our post-budget discussion. So maybe just a little background to yourself first, Dato, before we start the post-budget
Tan
discussion.
Sri, actually.
Well, background. I was a civil servant. I retired as Secretary General of the Ministry of Finance in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I was appointed as the first CEO of Khazanah National Berhad, which is the government's investment agency.
It was first started out at that period.
Yes, I was the first to assume that post. So, in other words, I was the pioneer.
Must be an interesting journey at that time because you were the first and it was something that is new for the government to embark on.
Yes.
An investment
agency.
It was
new. It was a new agency. So it was quite a challenging job. Our mission was to manage the government investments in the corporate sector and to also plan for any new strategic investments that we thought would be beneficial to the country. So I stayed there for 9 years and retired finally in 2003. Since then I've been doing, since then I am director, non-executive director and chairman of a few companies, including Plus Malaysia, the highway company.
Yeah, the toll company.
Standard Chartered Bank, Malaysia. Scientex Berhad, inshallah. So that's, and then voluntary work like the Persatuan Ekonomi Malaysia or the Malaysian Economic Association.
And that's, I have to say, quite an impressive portfolio there. And why economics actually? Why did economics interest you so much?
Well, I was trained, my education was in economics, University of Malaya, and I graduated in 1963. In 1968 and 1969, I was sent by the government for a one-year course in Oxford University, also in economic development. And then in 1973 to 1974, I went for a master's degree program in the United States, also in economics. I came back and I've been working in the economic planning unit in the Ministry of Finance.
What year was that?
Economic planning unit in the 80s.
Prior to your Khazanah.
69 to 80. And then Ministry of Finance, 1994. Retired 1994. Khazanah, retired 2003.
That's a whole timeline there. But before we move to the budget 2015, I just want to know, like, in your personal point of view, how much the reality of Malaysian economy has changed since the first time you assumed your role in economic planning unit until now, where we have moved towards the 21st century?
Oh, it has changed a lot.
I'm sure there's a lot of change.
Yes.
Goodness me, a lot. I mean, when I first started work, in the 60s, we were concerned about primary commodities because rubber, tin, and later palm oil were the main pillars of the economy. But by the 1980s, the economy has restructured, where manufacturing for domestic production, manufacturing for export became more and more important.
It was under the Tun Mahathir's era
Yeah, starting in the 80s under
of
Tun Mahathir.
industrialization.
And then later, 90s, there's also another good change. In other words, a good progress in terms of the development of the services sector, especially banking, finance, tourism.
Was that in the 90s? The finance
Yeah, I would
and
say
services.
starting from the 80s too. Yeah.
That's where we had CIMB,
Yeah, we
Maybank,
had
and all
all
that.
these banks, Islamic banking, but tourism, grew very rapidly because the government realized the importance of strengthening the services income from services income from foreign tourists. And so as a result, the economy today, you ask me how has it changed? The economy today is much more stable than it was 50 years ago when I started work.
That's a very optimistic perspective on our economy.
And I'm sure you were listening to the budget being tabled by our Prime Minister Najib Tun Razak. So what was probably your first impression or the first thing that you derived from the speech?
The speech is full of promise for the future of the country. For example, there's highlights like the fiscal reforms. When I say fiscal reforms, I mean the implementation of the GST next year, the subsidy rationalization program. These are very important fiscal reforms. So that is important because it ensures the future stability of the government finance, and because if government finance is strong, this will help the economy to be strong. Then the second big highlight for me is the large expenditure on highway projects, on rail projects, in other words, infrastructure development. Now, any country that wants to develop, must have good infrastructure. So that's good again for the future.
There are a few highways, including Sabah and Sarawak.
Yeah, that includes Sabah and Sarawak this time, yeah. And then education. As you all know, education is probably the most important part of our development. And the budget continues to allocate the biggest chunk of the money for education. I think, of course, the budget talks about the need to improve the quality of education. That's very encouraging. And this budget, I noticed that women and youth, have been included as important aspects of the country's development. Yeah.
And also, in addition to the government actually did introduce the youth program, especially for budget 2015.
Yes.
So there are many interesting highlights and also inclusion of different areas, different sectors as well. And at the same time, the government used the word people's economy to describe the budget. But in your perspective, is the budget is it inclusive enough to be called people's economy?
I think it is. because of the large emphasis given to education, women, youth, and also because the government is committed towards introducing the GST next year. It's committed towards carrying out the subsidy cuts and rationalization. You notice the government is spending quite a lot of money on BRIM. A few billion ringgit there, which is going to, which is aimed at providing income support for the lower income groups. I think overall I would say that the budget is inclusive because in addition to the cash handouts under BRIM, this country is lucky enough, to get education free, health free, and then subsidized public housing. So there are a lot of benefits for the ordinary people.
Glad that you mentioned BRIM because high cost of living is one of the key complaints the public, Malaysian in general, are concerned with. So when it comes to budget 2015, do you think the current BRIM can really address the high cost of living that Malaysians are facing, especially next year's GST will be introduced, and a lot of Malaysians, if I'm not mistaken, majority of them are still living in a wage that is below 3,000 ringgit on the household income level?
Well, the BRIM is meant to assist those who need assistance. Some may argue that it does not meet fully their requirement for assistance. But I believe that the way it is structured, it will help to alleviate the higher cost of living that will arise from the implementation of the GST and the subsidy cuts. Of course, nobody is saying that this is painless. There will be some pain. But we have to remember that Malaysia is not the only country doing this. There are poorer countries.
Like Indonesia?
Like Indonesia, you're correct there. The new president is saying that his main priority is
to do subsidy cut for fuel.
Because he wants to save billions of dollars from the budget.
In fact, he will save 19 billion US dollar, if I'm not mistaken. Or
yeah, that's a big amount of money. And he wants to spend that on things that are really important for the poor, like education, health, and hospitals. So that's in Indonesia. But in Malaysia, of course, our education, our health, and it's quite well developed. But there is a lot of things that the government has to do here too, for public transport, for public housing, for what we call to plan for a comprehensive social security system, like the developed countries in the West have. Those who have reached old age, those who cannot work because of certain reasons. The women, for example, women who give birth, they are given assistance. So we will be moving towards that. But to do that, we need a stronger revenue base and less leakages and wastages in the on the expenditure side.
And I have to interject because when you mentioned Jokowi's administration doing the the almost exact same thing that Najib's administration is doing, which is subsidy cut and also more focus on education and all. But in terms of the confidence level of the Indonesian people towards Jokowi's administration is pretty high compared to the confidence level of Malaysians towards Najib's administration. That is also because what they see is the current government are not that good at maintaining or trying to cover up the different wastage and leakages of the government as administration costs. Would you agree with that?
You mean the current government in Malaysia?
In Malaysia, yeah.
I think there's no doubt that the government has introduced various measures. For example, on procurement of government supplies, procurement of supplies.
They were that was one of the criticism that we received.
So now, because of the criticisms and complaints, most of the contracts, are issued based on open tender and competitive bidding.
Has that been a practice in all ministries or?
Yes, it's throughout the government. Then measures, are being taken to step up on corruption. I think we have seen a lot of news about that lately. Of course, corruption is one of the major reasons for wastage of expenditure. From what we hear, the government is also taking steps to penalize civil servants, for getting involved in corrupt activities.
So the government is pretty stringent on its own people as well.
Yeah. So
has that been really highlighted in the media about the government's treatment? I mean, the government's focus towards how it's going to reform its own, not just cabinet, but its own civil servants as well.
Yeah. I think that's quite it's discussed quite openly, and I think if you look at the new economic model, he's got various suggestions there on how to improve the police force, how to strengthen the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Agency, how to improve the judicial system. So there are a lot of measures. Now this is, I think if we are talking about what's next, or what should, the next budget or the coming 11th Malaysia plan concentrate on, I would like to say that these are the things that, should be spelled out in very clear terms.
Next year. Next 2 years.
How to make the economy more competitive and efficient by reducing all the wastages and leakages, by tackling corruption, by improving the integrity levels at all levels of government, how to introduce meritocracy in the government administration,
public sectors.
In the public sector. I think these are the key things that people feel should be addressed, more clearly, and hopefully in the 11th Malaysia plan, the government will do that.
And also, earlier when you mentioned about the fiscal changes and all that, a lot of people actually are not aware of how this can actually positively affect the economy, because they probably don't have the economic knowledge or what. So maybe you want to clarify a little bit on that, because most people just see it as a burden to them.
Well, I think we should just compare it with our own, let's say, in a family.
Okay.
In any family, if you spend more than what you earn, you will have to borrow somewhere, right, to pay your bills. The same thing with government. And if your debt level reaches a certain level, very risky level, then entrepreneurs, investors, foreign investors will get worried. What's going to happen to this country in the future? When they are worried, then they don't come into the country to invest, either in the stock market, in the financial market, or in direct investment, in fixed investment. Now, when there is no investment, all of us will be affected.
Actually,
our children will not get enough jobs.
You had a huge experience working in Kanzana as in the investment agency. What is the criteria for foreign companies to come and invest in any country? What is the deciding factor?
Well, the agency in the government which is responsible for promoting investment, especially foreign investment, is MIDA. MIDA under the Ministry of Trade and Industry. The criteria that they use is they will evaluate if the investment, is for the domestic market, or for export, whether it's resource based, and how much skills and technology the investment brings into the country. Those are the things that they look at before they approve the investment, and before they decide whether to give any incentives to the investor coming into the country.
Considering the human resource, the kind of infrastructure that Malaysia has right now, what level that, in terms of the feasibility of investment for foreign countries would be, and how can we improve from there? Based on the budget also, into consideration.
Well, Malaysia is fortunate because with our relatively well-developed infrastructure system, education, and with the legal, with the legal system that foreigners are familiar with, they find it a good place to come and do business. So Malaysia welcomes foreign investment as well as local investment, so long as it is advantageous to the country. If a particular project is going to cause problems for the environment, for example, I don't think Malaysia would welcome such project. If it is going to pollute the rivers, I don't think Malaysia would welcome such investment. But if they have no harmful effects on the environment, on the population, on our natural resources, I think Malaysia is generally quite liberal in receiving foreign investment.
So we are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we will continue our discussion on the post-budget.
ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hello, welcome back to Durian ASEAN. You're with Gowri.
And this is Grace.
And this is Arlene.
And you're listening to DurianASEAN.com, the voice of discovery and sharing.
And we are still with our guest.
That's right. He's still okay. he's still here, still with us, and we're going to continue our discussion on the post-budget.
So my question to you is about the budget allocation, because a lot of people have been, I would say, complaining about this year, I mean the budget that was tabled this month, early this month, is the allocation was at 273.9 billion ringgit, and a huge chunk of it, majority of it, are being allocated towards operating expenditure, which is at 223.4 billion ringgit, while the rest are for contingency fund and developmental expenditure. Do you think this kind of huge budget allocation, which is considered one of the highest, if not the highest, in Malaysia's history, is justified?
Yes. As a country which is still developing, the government has to spend. In fact, if the government cuts back on expenditure, it's not going to be good not only for the people but also for the economy. And secondly, the amount is within reasonable levels, because what is important is whether we are spending beyond our means. Now, if you look at the figures given in the economic report, our budget deficit is now about 3.5%. And this is not too high. Other countries have higher levels of deficit. But nevertheless, I think it is important to make sure that this deficit does not grow in size in terms of its ratio to the GDP. So that is the reason why economists have given the government very strong compliment, strong support for the GST and the subsidy rationalization program. Because if you look at the budget expenditure, the government is spending so many billion ringgit on subsidies. I think the fuel subsidy alone is
21 billion.
21 billion ringgit. Can you imagine that if you can save half the amount, you have another 10 extra billion ringgit, which you can spend on schools, on health, on roads. Those are more important for the people, including the ordinary people, than spending on fuel, on petroleum, on petrol. So I think all economists now agree that the government has got its priorities right. All agree that this is not easy for the government. I'm sure some people will continue to complain, especially about the GST, the increase in the pump price of petrol. But unfortunately, for any country to ensure sustainable growth, you must do away with wastages, with leakages. I don't think this is what the budget is trying to do.
But GST is seen as a burden, but actually it's more of a replacement to the current tax that we have. So is there really much of a difference? Is it really going to be a burden, or is that just an assumption?
No, overall, you're quite right. It's not a new tax. It replaces the two taxes that we have since the 1970s, called the sales tax and the services tax. So those taxes will be consolidated into the GST. And the GST will be implemented at a lower rate of 6%, whereas the sales tax now is 10%, right? And the service tax ranges from the sales tax ranges from 6 to 10%. The service tax is 5%. But now under GST, we'll only have one rate, 6%. And secondly, lot of items under
900 items, and that's the question that I want to ask. Like, there are some economies that are actually doubtful on this GST in Malaysia because they felt that the government is not implementing it wholeheartedly, with so many items being exempted or being zero rated, which means that at the end of the day, the government is still not getting the kind of revenue they ought to be getting to transform the country.
Frankly, I agree with their view on that.
Really?
Because any tax, if you introduce too many exemptions, then you make the tax more complicated to implement. You reduce the compliance rate, and you get less revenue than what you should collect. So I sincerely hope that the government will slowly try to reduce the exemption list. Ideally, there should be, very minimal. Like all countries, like in Australia.
Only the very basic
Zealand,
items.
Only the very basic items.
Yeah. And you want to say something?
Well,
guys?
you said the government is going to the right direction with the budget introduced, but then when it comes to GST, like we all mentioned, that there are still a lot of people do complain about this particular implement. So with that saying, can we still say that the government is going to the right direction with the GST implementation?
Well, I said before that some things can be painful,
Yes.
but like what you said, Indonesia is trying to do. Sometimes you have to take the antibiotic, if you want to cure your
That's a good metaphor.
your cold.
Yes.
You have to take the bitter pill, and this is why it's very important that in future we should not try to subsidize too many things in the country. When you subsidize, it becomes very difficult to take it back. So, as far as possible, we should not subsidize.
Not at all, or only for areas that is needed, like basic foods, for example.
Yeah, some subsidy, what they call this production subsidies, that is justified. But consumption subsidies, that usually is not benefiting the right group. And secondly, if the subsidies is too high, you are just encouraging smuggling and corruption.
Which is happening right now in Sabah region, which is the reason why they were having quite a number days of curfew until 21st of October. The last time we heard about the news of the smugglings of fuel there. And one area that I want to just get your opinion on the GST, because on the opposition side of the camp, to them, what the government should be focusing more in terms of expanding their tax revenue is to focus on capital gains tax instead of just introducing a GST tax, which is a more complicated tax than the current sales tax.
No, I don't think so. It's very difficult to agree with that idea because capital gains tax has a lot of implication. It will drive away investors.
But we have a lot of rich people here that we should be taxing them based on their properties
they are being
and
taxed
stocks.
on the corporate on their income tax. They are being taxed. And if they own companies, if the companies make money, they are taxed on the corporate income tax. If they earn dividends and salaries, they are taxed on the personal income tax. I think. And then now with the GST, if they spend money, to buy goods, to eat in the restaurants, the more expensive the goods are, the more expensive the restaurants are, they pay more. So, but when you tax capital gains, you are taxing those who make profits from investment in the stock market, in the in sale.
But isn't it the same when you make money out of working in a company? You are being taxed under the income tax. But those who make money out of investing in stocks and bonds and all that, they should be taxed because they are making a.
They are taxed on their income. They tax on the income.
And you were saying earlier that there are a lot of implications if we try to go about the capital gains tax. Maybe you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
I think this was discussed at the post-budget dialogue. Alin, I think you said you attended, and the reply given was that we are not ready yet at this stage. This stage, we are trying to encourage foreigners to come and invest in our market. Yeah, developed countries who do not have to rely on inflow of foreign funds, they can perhaps have the capital gains tax if they want. We are not ready, and I think the time is not right, because we are competing with Singapore also. Let's not forget that. If we do that, then even Malaysians, they will go to Singapore and take their money out and invest in Singapore or Hong Kong. And you have another problem, a lot of capital flowing out of the country. Our ringgit will depreciate. And who pays? When the ringgit depreciates, the cost of imports become more expensive, the prices of goods go up, and who will pay for all that? The poor. The poor will suffer.
But in reality, when you are talking about financial outflow, especially in the ranking of the financial illicit outflow, Malaysia is one of the worst in the world.
Well, there's been some report about that, but I think according to Bank Negara report, it's not really true that we are experiencing massive capital flight. A lot of the capital outflow has also to do with Malaysian companies looking for investments abroad. Because Malaysia is a small country with a small population, and many companies are finding that if they want to grow, they have to go to other countries. Like Malaysian companies are now going to India to build roads there. They are going to Indonesia to build housing projects. Even our EPF, is spending money, is investing in London, in property market, London. So that kind of investment abroad is not harmful, because when they make profits, the profits will be repatriated back to the country. So it's good. The country will be earning money from abroad. I mean, our Petronas, is investing in billions abroad in what? Uzbekistan or something.
Central Asia.
In Central Asia, in Canada, and a large proportion of Petronas, our oil output comes from the offshore and the foreign oil fields, which is good for the country. Yeah. So we should look at these capital flight figures that you mentioned in that aspect, in that sense.
So we are almost at the end of our discussion. So before we wrap things up, what are probably the changes that you'd like to see in the country?
I think the main change is to go back to education, because the country has to be more efficient, more competitive, if we want to become a high-income country by 2020. And that means the quality of its management in the public sector, in the private sector, has to be much higher than what it is now. And to achieve that, apart from education, we need also to carry out other reforms, where which provides incentives for investors, entrepreneurs to invest more, especially in skills, in skilled-based businesses or knowledge-based businesses.
Okay.
That's where our future lies.
All right. Thank you very much, Tan Sri, for joining us in our post-budget discussion this morning. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you very much.
So this is Gowri.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to.
And this is Arlene.
And the Grace.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.